Everywhere across the globe, you'll find squid getting washed ashore. It could be a few, or it could be dozens, even hundreds, with stretches of coastline sometimes covered in them for miles. But despite the urge to help them, it's best not to throw the squid back into the water. For years now, this has been happening along the coast of Sakhalin. As soon as fall sets in, thousands of Japanese flying squid end up washed ashore, creating a whole graveyard of mollusks. But why does this happen? Two main factors: migration and weather conditions. And soon you'll also learn why they shouldn't be tossed back into the ocean. For those who forget to hit the like button, do it right now before you forget. All right, let's keep going. Throughout much of the year, Japanese flying squid stay in the southern part of the Sea of Japan. But when summer rolls around, they make a feeding migration journey up to the Tatar Strait, which lies between Eurasia and Sakhalin, as the surface waters warm up. By late September and the first half of October, you'll find most of them hanging out in the northern part of the Tatar Strait. As autumn sets in, typically towards the end of October, squid start their journey back down south for the winter and breeding season. The squid's journey south is usually pretty swift. By the first half of November, they've vanished from these parts. Every now and then, squid decide to stick around a bit longer, not heading south until the middle of November. Why? Well, who knows what goes through their minds, right? Regardless of their choices, there are times when the water temperature drops suddenly. It's comfortable for squid only in the summer, but autumn cyclones bring rapid cooling. And by rapid, I mean really fast, like within just a few hours. That's the main reason squid end up dead. If the water cooled down slowly, they might stand a chance, but the way it happens, squid just can't handle the cold. They either die fast or get frozen and washed ashore, weakened. And then the lack of water finishes them off. Now, someone might argue that squid live deep down where it's chilly, so they must be used to the cold. And you know what? You're not quite wrong, but we're talking about those massive Humboldt squid. They're usually hanging out anywhere from 656 to 2,297 feet deep in the Northwest Pacific Ocean, where, yeah, it's pretty chilly. However, when it comes to Japanese flying squid, the deepest they occasionally venture is about 1,640 feet. They just aren't built for the cold down there. When it gets cold, squid slow down their metabolism regardless of their size, which leaves them very sluggish, almost like they're fainting. This seems to be fine at deep depths, but on the surface, sluggish squid can't handle the waves and end up getting carried onto the shore. So here's the question. What's worse, going back into the water or suffering on land? Well, for someone from the subtropics, cold water is a killer, especially if you dive into it suddenly. So if you stumble upon a cold, lifeless squid stranded on the beach, putting it back into the water won't help much. Chances are it'll just end up in shock once more. It might die immediately, but more likely than not, it'll be washed back ashore by the waves unless you choose to release it further out. Basically, it's a pointless thing to do. Answering the question of which death is more agonizing, on land or in water, it's actually not so easy. One reason is that scientists couldn't accurately determine for a long time whether invertebrate animals like squid, crabs, and lobsters can even feel pain. Eventually, it was found out that cephalopods do have nociceptors, nerve endings that quickly transmit potentially damaging stimuli to the central nervous system. According to another study, squid might feel something like pain, which even affects their behavior, making them more cautious. But it's still not a sure thing that squid can experience pain like humans, or at least like mammals in general. The main issue seems to be that scientists aren't paying enough attention to squid for some reason. Maybe it's because octopuses exist. They're way more fascinating creatures and happen to be relatives of squid. Both of them are cephalopods, and since they're related, let's take a look at what octopuses have to offer. For a while, people thought that using cold was the most humane method to kill an octopus. This approach is being considered by the Spanish seafood company Nueva Pescanova, which plans to raise octopuses on farms. But this practice has been observed elsewhere too. To get the mollusk ready for someone's dinner table, it's thrown into an icy bath. Since octopuses can feel pain, this method of killing them is not humane, but rather cruel. First comes a stunning shock from the cold, followed by intense pain. After a few seconds of desperate attempts to escape, there's numbness as the cold spreads inward, rendering them unable to move but still able to think. So they remain scared until their consciousness fades. It's eerie. Squid probably feel the same way when the water around them suddenly gets cold. Let's clear one thing up. When transporting live Japanese flying squid, people put them into 8-gallon polyethylene bags filled with 1.3 gallons of seawater at a temperature of 32 to 34 degrees Fahrenheit. It's like they're in a sort of tranquilized state, and in such a condition, squid can endure for 10 hours without showing stress. It might all come down to the oxygen levels. What about life and death on land? Again, there's not enough data. Scientists aren't sure how long squid can survive out of water, so it's hard to say how long a squid stranded on the beach will suffer. It could be anywhere from a few minutes to a few hours. Moreover, on land, they experience stress and may suffer from physical injuries because they're simply not built for life outside the ocean. After all, squid breathe through gills, so they could eventually suffocate. So what's the takeaway here? When there's a sharp cold snap, whether on land or in the water, squid will suffer the same fate. The only difference is that in water, it'll take longer. But in the end, the squid will still end up back on shore. So there's no point in trying to rescue the poor creature by tossing it back into the cold water. Honestly, it looks like we can't save the squid that have washed ashore. At least not all of them. Remember, sometimes there are thousands of them, even if you try to take them back to where they were supposed to migrate. The ocean's temperature drops so rapidly that it quickly kills off squid. In other words, most of the animals washed ashore are already dead. There's no saving them at that point. Even if the squid are still alive, the sudden temperature plunge could have caused internal damage, which also leaves them with no chance of survival. If squid happen to find themselves on dry land in a coma-like state, maybe from being transported, there's still a way to help them. However, it's important to act lightning fast before irreversible consequences like suffocation and atmospheric pressure start taking effect on the squid's soft bodies. The problem is that it's physically impossible to predict where, when, and how many squid will wash ashore to quickly get there and save them. Sure, there are times when squid get some help. Back in 2017, a squid of Onychia robusta species washed up on the shore of one of the Aleutian Islands. Luckily, it was still alive when a vet stumbled upon it. She managed to drag it back to deeper waters, and off it swam on its own. But this squid isn't your typical Japanese flying squid. Nobody knows why it ended up on the beach or what happened to it after it was rescued. Actually, squid don't always need help. There are times when they've simply fulfilled their biological role and are ready to die. When people stumble upon dead squid washed up on the shore, they tend to see it as a tragedy. But some types of squid live fast and die young, doing so for the sake of their offspring. The risk of dying between 2 reproductive cycles is too high, so these animals simply go all out at one point, devoting themselves entirely to their offspring, and then they die. They just exhaust themselves, and that's how nature intended it. It's all part of the normal life cycle, so there's really no point in trying to save these squid. They're not planning on living any longer anyway. Sometimes trying to rescue a stranded squid can not only be pointless, but also seriously risky. A guy was strolling along Lanikai Beach in Hawaii when he noticed a squid lying on the sand. He picked it up to take a closer look, only to find out the squid was alive and it bit him strong enough to draw blood. It took him a while to just pry the creature off his hand. By the way, squid carry toxin. While this toxin isn't harmful to humans, getting bitten still isn't exactly enjoyable.
It's actually God damn me, this
Okay, we can't throw them back into the sea, and saving them isn't an option either. So what do we do with these thousands of squid? Eat them? Actually, not a bad idea. When thousands of squid washed up on the shores of Sakhalin, locals were thrilled. Without waiting for checks or explanations on why there were so many squid on the beach, people rushed to collect them. They skipped work, took sacks full of mollusks, some even filled whole trucks. The risk of poisoning didn't even scare anyone. Perhaps only the more cautious folks of Sakhalin would gather squid that were still moving, ensuring they were definitely fresh. However, most people just took them all. This was despite local authorities urging to send samples to toxicologists in such cases. Squid can be food for both humans and animals, not to mention they can be sold. So why let good squid go to waste while scientists carry out tests? There's probably only one squid species you could try to save if you find it alive on the beach. It's the Humboldt squid we mentioned earlier. Just a reminder, these massive creatures live up in the northern latitudes and at great depths where it's not just cold but also low on oxygen. Still, Humboldt squid can slow down their metabolism so they hardly need any oxygen. It's pretty simple. When a squid finds itself in an environment with low oxygen levels, it slows down its energy usage. By using less fuel, it also reduces the amount of oxygen needed to kickstart this process. You catch the idea here? If a Humboldt squid can switch its body into a low oxygen mode by slowing down its metabolism, then it could potentially survive out of water for a bit. It might not last long, but in theory it could buy enough time for someone to spot it on the beach. After all, these squid are pretty big and hard to miss. Just a heads up, these are just our guesses. For some reason, scientists haven't given any info on how long squid can survive out of water. Alright, let's say we're not dealing with a bunch of tiny squid, but one huge one, like a Humboldt squid. What do we do with it? Drag it back into the water? Definitely not on your own, mainly because, as mentioned before, a squid stranded on shore might have injuries that could be fatal. Putting such an animal back in the water might only prolong its suffering. A great example would be the massive squid found on the coast of South Africa. The creature, measuring around 11 feet long, was already dead, seemingly washed ashore after sustaining injuries. It probably collided with a commercial or fishing vessel, as there was a long wound on its body that could have been caused by a propeller. The squid was near the surface when the ship hit it, and then the weakened creature was just carried ashore. Returning it to the water wouldn't have made a difference. Well, it would have made a sumptuous feast for other marine animals. However, there are other reasons why it's not a good idea to try to haul giant squid back into the sea, whether they're alive or dead. Each giant squid found on land is an opportunity for scientists to learn more about these creatures, because as you've probably realized, humanity knows very little about squid. It's as if all we know about them is how to cook them. Other information not related to recipes or calorie content is obtained from the carcasses of squid found on beaches. Whales also contribute a bit by feasting on squid and then dying. You can glean some insights from the remnants in their stomachs, although only fragments of squid remain. But that's all there is. I mean, all there is. Giant squid live at enormous depths, and people seldom encounter them, let alone thoroughly investigate them. To give you an idea of how crazy it is, the first photos of a live giant squid were only taken in 2004, and video footage didn't come until later, in 2013. Keep in mind, Aristotle was writing about these creatures way back in the 4th century BC. That's how stories about krakens come to be. When you know there's something huge with tentacles living in the ocean, but you have no clue what it is, it's easy to get scared. So if you happen to stumble upon a giant squid of any kind while strolling along the beach, it's best to report the finding somewhere and let the experts figure out what to do with it. Squid problems are handled by different entities in different countries, and the destiny of these sea creatures can also differ. For instance, if the body is well preserved, it might even end up in a museum, just like it happened with the Natural History Museum in London. They offered the museum a squid back in 2004, and it was almost intact, plus it was a whopping 28 feet long. Basically, it was too good of an opportunity to pass up. Moreover, most other well-known remains of giant squid consist of fragments washed up on beaches or found in the stomach contents of sperm whales. The London giant was accidentally caught by a fishing trawler, so scientists got the whole squid. Even over in Africa, they've got their own museum featuring a whole section for invertebrate critters. Their collection already includes 20 enormous squid, and the largest of the bunch measures a staggering 30 feet in length. In 2022, a massive squid carcass, partly buried in the sand, was discovered in New Zealand. The tourists who stumbled upon it were totally shocked, and you can see why. It's unclear how long the entire body of the dead squid was because most of its tentacles were bitten off. After snapping some photos, the tourists reported the find to New Zealand's Department of Conservation, who said they'd try to dig the remains out of the sand to take a closer look. But if you thought that the giant squid found on the beach could be used for something more interesting than just handing it over to scientists, like grilling it, then that's a terrible idea. And it's not just because we don't know exactly how long this squid has been dead on land. Giant squid have a high level of ammonia in their bodies, which helps them float. Eating them is simply impossible. The taste would be awful. Well, for humans anyway. Sperm whales, on the other hand, have no problem with it. This is the octopus garden, the biggest known aggregation of octopuses on the planet. Here, thousands of creatures have come together in one spot, about 2 miles below the ocean surface. The garden stretches along the coast of Central California, but despite the name, humans didn't create this place. It's all natural. Researchers first stumbled upon thousands of octopuses nesting on the deep ocean floor in 2018, shocking people worldwide. It took researchers several years to thoroughly investigate, but they finally pieced it all together, and they had a lot to figure out. The octopuses in this garden were in really weird positions. They were upside down with their limbs twisted and wrapped around their bodies. It's like someone turned them inside out. Scientists have documented 5,718 octopuses covering an area of 6 acres at the heart of Octopus Garden. According to the team's estimates, the total population in the 820-acre garden could easily exceed 20,000 octopuses. Turns out that these deep-sea octopuses of the Mussooctopus robustus species migrate to the garden for mating and nesting purposes. In other words, they only come here to continue their lineage. They don't do anything else. It all starts when both male and female octopuses arrive at the garden. Females are on the lookout for a warm spot to lay their clutch of around 60 elongated sausage-shaped eggs. While brooding, mothers cover the eggs with their bodies, protecting them from predators getting too close. That's why females contort themselves in such a peculiar way. It's a defensive posture. Throughout the incubation period, females sustain themselves using reserves from their own tissues while also tending to the developing eggs. It's worth noting that the garden discovered in California is the largest gathering of octopuses ever found by scientists. So basically, there are other gardens like that, which they also call nurseries because octopuses breed there. Another nursery was discovered not far from the coast of Costa Rica. However, the discovery in California still amazed scientists. Firstly, because of the sheer number of octopuses, and secondly, these creatures are typically solitary, preferring cool water. Everything scientists saw didn't quite match up with the information already known. These octopuses were sitting on a hydrothermal vent. The heat from the vent helps eggs develop faster. It's simple. The colder the water, the slower the embryos develop. Researchers studying the garden expected octopus eggs to hatch in about 5 to 8 years at freezing point, or possibly later. Surprisingly, the baby octopuses emerged in less than 2 years instead. The warmth from thermal vents boosted the metabolism of both the mother octopuses and their offspring, reducing the incubation time. Regular 5 to 8 years carry too many risks for offspring. Turning from an egg to an octopus is no easy feat. Large gatherings of octopuses like the garden attract predators. Living alongside nesting females is a diverse community of invertebrates that certainly welcome unhatched eggs and vulnerable hatchlings, especially since there isn't much food at great depths. There's also the risk of injuries and infections lurking around. Basically, it's tough being small at the bottom of the sea. A mother octopus only has a limited amount of time to protect her eggs because her own body's resources are running low. The longer it takes for the octopuses to hatch, the higher the chance that the mother won't make it. The shorter the incubation period, the better the chances for the offspring to survive, and the more time the mother has to protect them. So picking up the pace seems like a smart move. Just so you know, based on different information, natural incubation without any heating can actually take anywhere from 5 to 10 years, or even more. So the fact that the garden's offspring pulled it off in 2 years means they did it 5 times faster. It's sort of like if human pregnancy only lasted less than 2 months instead of 9. Hopefully, something like this will be possible someday. Someone might wonder, how did scientists dive so deep into the ocean and study it for so long? Do they have their own version of Steve? Well, it's all thanks to modern tech. Researchers set up a camera at the bottom, snapping pics and telling octopuses apart by their scars and quirks. Turns out all the octopuses in the garden were adult males and females ready to reproduce. Their numbers were growing, but there were no youngsters or teens around until the offspring hatched. Okay, let's figure out why the temperature is higher in the garden, causing the octopus babies to grow faster. Just to remind you, it's located about 2 miles beneath the ocean's surface, on a little hill close to the foot of the underwater Davidson Mountain. And it's this mountain that's the key factor because it's a dormant underwater volcano. The water around here is a chilly 35 degrees Fahrenheit, which is quite cold. But in the octopus garden, it's a different story. The water heats up to a toasty 52 degrees. When scientists first found the octopus garden, they saw something they called shimmering water. This happens when warm and cool waters mix, suggesting undiscovered thermal springs nearby. Further research conducted by scientists has confirmed that octopus nests are located in crevices bathed by hydrothermal vents. In other words, female octopuses have chosen the warmest spots for incubating their eggs. How do hydrothermal vents work in general? It's simple. Water seeping beneath the ocean floor takes heat from the Earth's mantle, then comes out through volcanic rocks like Davidson Volcano. Unlike hydrothermal vents, which form on the crests of ridges and shoot out streams of hot water, making them easy to spot, these thermal springs are truly mysterious. They release warm water that dissipates just a few feet above the seafloor, making them very difficult to locate. They can only be found thanks to that faint shimmering. Those octopuses in the garden hit the jackpot with the temperature being perfect. Down below, there are some seriously hot springs. If a female octopus were to lay her eggs there, they'd cook in a flash, like hard-boiled egg quick, if one can say so. At the same time, cold water's like putting the brakes on for octopuses, no matter how old they are. Octopuses are ectotherms, i.e. cold-blooded creatures, so deep sea temperatures slow down their metabolism, which basically means the chemical reactions happening inside their cells. Simply put, it's how their bodies get energy from the environment to grow, develop, and reproduce. So all the important stuff needs that energy. Faster metabolism means more energy for the body. For octopuses, this surplus energy from warmth is used for nurturing their eggs. And the greater the energy, the faster baby octopuses emerge. However, everything has its limits. You can't crank up the temperature even higher and expect octopuses to speed up so much that they hatch in just a week and become adults right away. According to research conducted on the octopus Maya species, if the water temperature exceeds 80 degrees Fahrenheit, female octopuses stop laying eggs altogether. And if they've already laid some, those eggs die within a few days. Like most other cephalopods, the octopuses in the garden die after mating. The males die immediately while the females die after hatching their offspring. Having so many dead animals in one place is like a feast for scavengers, or more like a buffet. They'll always have food no matter what happens. It's not like some females, for example, get lucky and survive one breeding cycle, then decide to go for another. During the entire incubation period, which by the way lasts a full 2 years, females don't hunt at all. They simply don't eat and depend entirely on what they've already stockpiled before reaching their maternal phase. In the meantime, invertebrates await the end of their incubation. In this video, for instance, you can see a sea anemone devouring a dead octopus. The waiting paid off. The self-destruction of female octopuses, regardless of their species or habitat, is a topic that fascinates scientists greatly. While many animal species die after reproducing, the behavior of octopus mothers stands out for its disturbing nature. Not only do they stop eating, but some actively seek to end their own lives using any means possible. Once they've fulfilled their reproductive duties, these females may bash themselves against rocks, tear at their own skin, and even consume fragments of their own tentacles. It looks like utter madness. Researchers have now found chemicals that seem to regulate this behavior. After an octopus lays its eggs, there are changes in its body. The production of steroid hormones increases, and then there's a biochemical shift that seals its fate. But that's a topic for another video. Let's head back to the garden. A time-lapse camera captured how nesting females push away octopus carcasses to keep scavengers from getting too close to their eggs. Despite having enough food already, scavengers are always on the hunt for more, especially in the depths of the sea where food is scarce. Big scavengers like giant grenadiers, a cusk eel, whelks, and sea anemones feast on octopus remains. They must feel pretty happy down there, as the garden offers 72% more food for scavengers compared to the surrounding waters. These scavengers, fish, shrimp, sea stars, and snails build a thriving ecosystem sustained by deceased octopuses. Meanwhile, in similar rocky underwater areas, the animal population is less varied and less dense. As the hatchlings emerge, they head off to survive and grow up elsewhere. The mother dies, eaten by scavengers, and a new female promptly takes her place. Remember, they pick crevices for nests, cozy and warm spots, but there's only so many. Plus, as smart as octopuses are, they're unlikely to worry over who died in that spot. Nature is cruel. It has one goal: to ensure offspring come into the world, and everything else doesn't matter. A new cycle begins. Until recently, scientists thought that groups of octopuses were something unusual, like a rare find, almost an exception to the rules. But nowadays, octopus gardens are popping up more and more often, and they're not always clustered together. It seems like this phenomenon is more common than we thought. As of today, researchers have identified 5 deep-sea octopus nurseries, 2 off the coast of Central California, 2 off the coast of Costa Rica, and 1 near Vancouver Island in Canada. The first nursery was discovered in Costa Rica in 2013. The cluster of more than 100 octopuses was in a hydrothermal spring located about 100 miles off the Pacific coast of Costa Rica at a depth of 10,000 feet. These octopuses also incubated eggs, but not a single clutch survived. The second discovered octopus nursery was the one near Davidson Mountain, the one we mentioned in our video. Then in 2019, another one was discovered not far from Sada. When we say not too far, we mean about 10 miles away, which is quite a journey for octopuses. Just recently, in 2023, scientists discovered a new nursery in Costa Rica, followed by another one in Canada. Let's take a closer look at the most recent nursery. It all began with methane bubbles bubbling up from the ocean floor, bursting through. This creates carbonate rocks, which later become homes for animals. Despite the cold, these places are where Granellodon pacifica octopuses have chosen to raise their young. It just so happens that this deep-sea creature holds the record for the longest incubation period. The female takes care of her nest for 4.5 years. Perhaps other animals from our video would have broken this record if not for the dormant volcano that warmed them up. One of the most intriguing mysteries for scientists is how octopuses manage to find their nurseries. They might stumble upon a future nursery by accident and decide it's a great place, or they might discover it, remember their location, and then return when it's time to reproduce. It remains a mystery how far octopuses migrate to nesting sites and whether they return to their birthplace like salmon. Octopuses have a keen sense of smell, allowing them to track the scent of many of their deceased relatives, even if they've been eaten by some anemones. It seems like these places definitely need protection, and sure thing, Davidson Seamount and its octopus garden are being protected as part of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. Climate change, fishing, and mining pose threats to deep-sea areas. Protecting the unique environment where deep-sea animals gather to feed or reproduce is critical. Yet effective protection requires a careful study of the garden. Scientists are currently on it because, despite prior research efforts, many intriguing aspects remain unexplored. Today, within the boundaries of the wildlife reserve, it's prohibited to search for or extract oil, gas, or any other valuable minerals. Also, drilling, any kind of digging, and constructing buildings are not allowed. If a ship accidentally runs aground in this area, it cannot be abandoned. Anchoring the ship and leaving it unattended is not allowed, and neither is leaving any harmful substances on board. Disposing of substances is also prohibited, as well as interacting with local species, introducing non-native ones, attracting great white sharks, using motorboats, and even flying too low over the water. This list isn't nearly complete. It might be best to avoid that area altogether to prevent accidentally breaking any rules, because they take monitoring all the rules in the reserve really seriously. They patrol by land, air, and sea. They use small boats and big patrol ships to protect the area, and the rangers keep a close eye on literally everything. Most individual violations usually occur in small areas and happen within a short period. However, some types of violations happen frequently throughout the reserve, like the hunting of marine mammals or birds. Punishments fail to stop people. Breaking the rules in the reserve can lead to civil penalties of up to $140,000 per day. Besides fines, those who break the rules might have to foot the bill for cleaning up their mess and restoring the natural surroundings. Any gear involved in the violation, like boats, tools, or equipment, could get seized until the court sorts things out. When rules are broken in a wildlife reserve, it often means breaking other federal and state laws too. This can lead to fines, the possibility of having property taken away, getting arrested, and even facing criminal charges. Just so you know, interfering with law enforcement officers' investigations or activities within the reserve is also considered a criminal offense. It's amazing how scientists weren't scared to study octopuses. The power of science, right? Did you remember to hit the like button? If not, it's not too late yet. This video shows a group of men stumbling upon a strange discovery. After digging up the ground, they found something resembling a wriggling surface of a giant pineapple. No, it's not one huge organism, but dozens of turtles stacked on top of each other. In winter, the turtles enter a kind of hibernation, and depending on the species, they can spend several months underground or in mud. In the video, the soft-shell turtles are seen burying themselves in mud, where they stay from late fall until spring. So it could be a group hibernation, similar to what happens with turtles, but mostly it's just guesswork because scientists haven't made any comments on it yet. Here are a couple of facts for you to draw your own conclusions. First, not all turtles sleep in groups. Most of them sleep alone. Second, the animals are arranged very neatly, almost as if they had a clear plan. Or perhaps this was done by a man. If a person did this, there could be several reasons. In many countries where they're found, especially in East Asia, soft-shell turtles are considered a delicacy and are often eaten. It's likely that people raise these turtles on farms, and it's possible the animals were simply buried during hibernation. Or maybe it's a way of preserving and storing them. Turtles are kept cool to prevent them from spoiling. Weird? Definitely. But breeding turtles for consumption is already an unusual practice. Regardless of why the animals were buried, in both scenarios, the turtles will end up becoming someone's lunch. You know what? Turtles are in danger not only on farms. Every turtle, as it goes into hibernation, doesn't even realize that it might be the last thing it ever does in its life. Let's start by understanding how hibernation works in turtles. It's not quite the same as what you see in, for example, bears. Turtle hibernation, as well as that of other reptiles, is sometimes called brumation, a kind of resting state during which the body's functions such as metabolism, heart rate, and digestion slow down significantly. During brumation, reptiles may not move, eat, drink, or defecate for several weeks. They conserve energy in response to the low temperature and certainly don't gain weight before entering this state. Saving energy isn't enough. Turtles need to find the right spot for winter because turtles are cold-blooded. Their body temperature depends on the temperature around them. Once it drops below freezing point, the water in a turtle's body freezes like any other liquid, causing the animal to die. So the turtle's aim is to find a safe place for brumation. In this case, tightly packed underground mud burrows are a great option for weathering the cold. They're so great that some species return to the same spot every year. It remains a mystery how reptiles manage to survive underground for months without coming to the surface for a breath of air. One theory suggests they rely on air pockets down there. Also, they go through brumation, during which their metabolism slows down significantly, conserving oxygen. Some turtles can even breathe air through their cloaca. Yeah, Turtle Man would be a really weird superhero. So what about collective brumation? Scientists discovered in the 1990s that some turtles brumate closely together in groups, and later studies confirmed this. However, here's the interesting part. Turtles don't huddle together in burrows to keep warm. This is because turtles are cold-blooded, and staying together during brumation, or anywhere else, does not raise their temperature, as it does with warm-blooded animals. In short, turtles cannot warm each other up. So why do these turtles brumate together? Perhaps one reason for this group gathering is to use collective signals that increase the likelihood of coming out of brumation at the same time. Or the available brumation spots might be limited, and turtles brumate in the same burrow in large groups because it guarantees safety. It's interesting that turtle gatherings during brumation are more frequent in northern regions. This adds weight to the theory that brumation spots could be extremely limited. Also, this might have something to do with mating. With more turtles around, there's a better chance of finding a future partner when you wake up. The depth of burrowing depends entirely on the species. Common box turtles, for instance, dig burrows in the woods before brumation ranging from 4 to 20 inches deep. Even though the site should offer shelter and protection during brumation, these clusters of turtles can pose a threat to the entire population. If the brumation site is found, they'll all die instantly, but we'll get to that in a bit. But here's what I want to figure out for now. Many people keep turtles as pets. Do these turtles also go into brumation? On the one hand, brumation is really important. Experts say that if you don't let a turtle brumate, it's more likely to get sick and die earlier. Christy, the happy owner of 2 box turtles, says that her family has been helping captive-born box turtles go into brumation for more than 20 years. The turtles spend 5 months underground in a state of brumation before being unearthed in the spring. And it seems like the animals are doing great. However, if you look for tips for pet turtle owners, you'll quickly find out that brumating them seems to be unnecessary. They feel quite comfortable in the winter without burrowing because they're not in the wild where the cold would threaten their lives. But you can't go against evolutionary mechanisms. Some turtles get so slow in winter that they stop eating. In this case, it's indeed better to send them into brumation until spring, taking a bunch of factors into account. It might sound odd, but burying a turtle alive is actually a very delicate process. During brumation, a turtle can die if it was sick when it began or had recently recovered. Even something as simple as a cold can kill the animal during brumation. Improper diet can also lead to death. Being underweight leads to death. Being too young also leads to death. Well, you'll definitely need to consult a vet if you don't want to make things worse. They can also help you figure out the perfect conditions for your turtle, which can be tricky. In some countries, there are even special hotels where you can take your pet turtle when you go on vacation. These hotels also ensure that turtles have a comfortable winter vacation and help them safely enter a brumation state. How about turtle farms? Well, brumation is a good thing because you don't have to spend money on food and cleaning for several months. Saves a lot of money, especially when you have a lot of turtles. So for farmers, a turtle that's temporarily asleep is much better than one that's awake all year round. However, you might not need to bury them. For instance, these turtles, which are kept on a farm with enclosures and ponds, actually don't burrow at all. They just sleep on the ground and do just fine. Well, at least while they're still asleep. Coming out of brumation isn't an easy or simple process, regardless of where the animal was, above ground, below ground, in the backyard, in the forest, or a turtle motel. As turtles burn through their energy reserves, they accumulate lactic acid in their bodies when there's not enough oxygen. Humans experience something similar, which causes muscle pain after exercising. Turtles find this discomfort just as inconvenient as we do, and to cope with it, they utilize their shell. More specifically, they use the calcium stored inside it to neutralize the acid and to ease and soothe cramps. There are limits to combating the buildup of lactic acid, and towards the end of winter, turtles start feeling rather uncomfortable. Therefore, when the animals emerge from brumation, they often find themselves completely disoriented due to the excessive accumulation of acid and all the related sensations. This is why in spring, turtles immediately seek warmth to accelerate metabolism and rid their bodies of the remaining lactic acid. Lactic acid isn't the only issue turtles encounter when attempting to brumate. Throughout brumation, turtles become so lethargic that you can simply stick your hand into their burrow and pull them out. They won't put up any fight. While it's recommended that people refrain from doing this to avoid harming the animal, predators in the wild don't feel guilty about that. For instance, American mink actively hunt common musk turtles when they're brumating during winter. Though these turtles brumate under the ice in shallow water, the mink isn't particularly bothered by this. In Texas, other types of turtles, especially box turtles, also often fall prey to predators like dogs, foxes, raccoons, and rodents. Predators take advantage of the brumation period to grab a meal, and the turtles can't stand up for themselves. But let's get back to the turtles that look like a giant pineapple underground. These are Asiatic soft-shell turtles, and they definitely have their own natural enemies. They're tougher than some rodents because the predators of these turtles include smooth-coated otters and tigers. The natural egg predators of this turtle include monitor lizards, crows, snakes, eagles, and wild boars. Humans, of course, are among them too. Although they can't be considered natural predators, in theory, many of these animals could dig up the turtle from the ground. Unfortunately, there's no precise information available on this matter. Maybe turtles are just lucky, as many predators of turtles also slow down during the winter. For example, monitor lizards and snakes, they have better things to do than digging into the ground. After all, they get cold too. Florida softshell turtle, which as its name suggests also has a soft shell, is also on the menu of herons. The good news is when the cold sets in, herons fly south to warmer climates, leaving turtles without one of their predators during brumation. In Florida, alligators also hunt turtles, and the Florida softshell turtle has evolved to be prepared for this natural threat. These turtles are extremely stealthy, can move quickly on land, and have a powerful bite. Well, they can't truly compete with alligators, but during the winter months when it gets pretty cold in Florida, alligators also go into a brumation. This happens because alligators are cold-blooded. It's handy when your predators share the same vulnerabilities as you do, though it's not very handy when the place you've picked for a nap is visible to the naked eye, even to a person. They say you can just stick your hand into a hole. Of course, it's important to know the habitats of turtles and the places they prefer to nest, at least in theory. For example, Chinese pond turtles mainly brumate in abandoned ponds or on land. The land brumation spots are usually covered with grass, providing turtles with shelter, protection, and temperature stability during brumation. So knowing all that, it's easy to find the turtle underground or in the water. Since 2007, people in Chiba Prefecture, Japan have been catching common snapping turtles. If you're wondering what they are, just know they're being hunted for a reason. They're destructive to local ecosystems, eat just about anything in large quantities, and they're aggressive and fierce. Plus, their bite can easily sever a person's finger. However, Japanese hunters have found a way to deal with these turtles and catch them in winter. A hunter simply puts his hand into the pond where he suspects a turtle might be, and it works. This method allows hunters to catch around 300 turtles per year. While this hasn't significantly impacted the population, that's not the point here. Another example is the turtle hunting in Vietnam. When the rare field turtle appeared there in 2015, people didn't bother to hunt for this species cautiously. They just grabbed a bag, a stick, a machete, and chopped everything in their way, overturned every stone and stump, poked at everything they could, and dug everywhere, just hoping to find the hidden animals. And all because the price of these turtles is too high to spend time being careful. Selling turtles is such a lucrative business that many people abandon what they did and go on the hunt. Villagers in Vietnam often tell stories of someone, somewhere, selling 2 large turtles weighing almost a pound each for a whopping $19,650. There are plenty of such stories, so naturally people buy nets and go out hunting. Or is it more accurate to call it fishing? After all, we're talking about aquatic turtles. While most stories about immense prices are based on rumors, that doesn't stop anyone. Turtles are expensive. It was January 2023, and a family of beavers was relocated to Lac Le Monde National Nature Reserve to boost biodiversity. However, just a month later, 2 of the beaver kits died. And on a camera recording, people spotted an otter swimming near one of the little ones. When the kit was examined, it was clear it had been hunted and eaten. Though the body of the second kit wasn't found, it likely met the same fate. It's not just a one-off thing. Not many people know that in the wild, otters and beavers have never been pals. And otters go out of their way to make sure beavers don't feel safe, even in their own homes, especially when winter rolls around.
Winter's coming.
Let's start with beavers and their dams. When beavers build dams, they also create cozy ponds for themselves. The water from these ponds slowly goes down, usually through natural gaps in the dam. However, researchers noticed that in winter, if otters live nearby, the water drains much faster. They got curious, kept observing, and found an otter that was digging a tunnel in the dam. The sounds of chewing and gnawing in the places where water was draining caught the scientists' attention. In short, otters are really trying hard to break dams, and beavers have to constantly patch them up as soon as they discover these holes. But otters don't dig their tunnels out of malice or a strong dislike for beavers. Remember, this happened during winter. So since otters can move around the dams under the ice, they're not confined to just one pond during the winter. Plus, they don't have to travel across the surface of the ponds and search for holes in the ice. Otters actually love ice, but they love breathing even more. In marshes where the cold temperature remains on the water surface, otters find beaver dams and make burrows in them. Water starts leaking out, creating a layer of air under the ice, which makes fishing way easier. Also, fish are attracted to the current, and the reduced water volume means more prey in a smaller space. So it's just win after win. However, beavers don't see it this way. According to scientists, wrecking a dam means putting beavers through a roller coaster of stress, and it's not good news for them. In winter, when water levels go down, it really lowers their chances of making it through because they can't get to their food stashes. Plus, the air getting under the ice just adds to their energy stress. Where does all this lead? Well, first and foremost, it leads to reproductive problems. Thanks a lot, energy stress. It's really tough to reproduce normally when you're cold, sometimes resulting in miscarriages for females. With animals becoming less resistant to pathogens, the risk of getting sick increases. Also, their growth slows down because in such conditions, growth isn't a top priority. At the same time, there's a higher chance of ground predators attacking them. So when otters tear down dams, they cause problems for beavers that can be really tough to deal with. Of course, beavers understand how important their dam is, so they hurry to rebuild it ASAP. Within 2 days after it was destroyed, whether completely or partially, they usually patch it up or even rebuild it entirely. So even if you wipe out the dam completely, beavers will just roll up their sleeves and start over. If only everyone could be this productive. It's true, the impressive speed of beavers often becomes a headache for people trying to remove them from their properties. Imagine this. You spend 12 hours tearing down a dam, and the next day the beaver can rebuild it in just 2 hours? And they do it for free. And I'm not exaggerating right now. People who were dismantling dams ran into a problem. Beavers were rebuilding them faster. Beavers don't recycle materials like we do. They just keep cutting down fresh trees for their repairs, and since they live in forests, the wood shortage isn't really their problem. So dealing with it's tough, even though they're not thrilled about it either. Why? Well, these impromptu repair jobs force them to venture onto land more often where predators lurk, and beavers aren't equipped to deal with them. The only thing that can stop beavers from repairing their dams is winter and the lack of sounds that come with it. Scientists notice that during winter, beavers don't always fix their dams because they can't see or hear the water loss signals. Simply put, beavers swim under the ice with their ears closed. The beaver's repair mode usually kicks in as soon as they hear the sound of running water. In winter, though, there's not as much sound because leaks can happen under the ice. We kind of forgot about some of the main characters in today's video. Take this otter, for example. It heads towards the water, but coming towards it's a beaver. It's what you might call a territory squabble. Even though the otter is impressively agile, it seems like this beaver intimidates it with its impressive size and persistent presence. Eventually, the predator backs off and scurries away. Beavers and otters naturally occupy different niches and have distinct diets. Typically, it's believed that they have a commensal relationship. Otters benefit from beavers, while beavers are indifferent to otters, neither gaining nor losing anything. But things may not be as simple as they seem. The way these animals treat each other can vary a lot based on factors such as food availability, the season, whether there are beaver kits around, and more. There's a pretty big number of factors that can affect how they interact. In a way, otters sort of mooch off beavers, benefiting from what beavers build and do. Imagine having neighbors who aren't exactly thrilled about each other, but have to live next door because both find it convenient to be in the same housing complex. Now think about how happy you'd be if these neighbors occasionally tried to snatch your kids. Well, that's how beavers feel about otters trying to steal their offspring. So they defend their young and chase away the otters. But the environment that beavers shape with their dams is also perfect for otters, so they stick together. If there are beavers around, you can bet there are otters too. And even if the beavers move on, otters might stay behind. For instance, they really enjoy lounging and hiding out in abandoned beaver lodges. You can see why otters love it. Those lodges are genuinely secure and cozy hideouts. Even though there are many cases of beavers attacking otters, like in the video we just saw, these are mainly just attempts to intimidate them and chase them away. So the real villains here are the otters, who don't see anything wrong with snacking on their neighbor's offspring. It's all because nature designed otters to be carnivores, gobbling up anything from fish to tiny birds and mammals. Otters aren't picky eaters, but they sure have big appetites, and their narrow teeth are just right for cutting through fish and meat. Otters' meal choices are pretty much limited to what they can catch. If they could, they'd happily devour a deer without any second thoughts. Thankfully for deer, they're usually too large for otters to handle, but if there's a beaver kit nearby, unattended, an otter won't hesitate to make it its lunch. Have you ever seen beaver kits? They're only about 12 inches long, including their tail, though they can weigh over 1.3 pounds. Knowing that otters can snatch up waterfowl, those little beaver kits probably don't look too hefty to them. Adult beavers totally get it. When baby beavers are born, their parents start seeing otters as a threat. Hidden cameras sometimes catch how grown-up beavers chase otters away from their dams. While the little ones are still tiny, it's important to not give predators any chance to snatch them up. Oh, and here's another thing. I'm not sure if this info has stood the test of time, but we came across some old studies that claim otters might still eat beavers even when they're all grown up. It's pretty uncommon though, only happening when there are no other options on the table. So otters either have to feast on adult beavers or starve. In those cases, it seems like the loner beavers are the ones who become targets. Guess dealing with a few beavers at once is just too much for otters? Although in research from 1984, it's mentioned that sometimes otters even kick beavers out of their lodges. This usually happens in the fall. However, other scientists provide evidence of beavers and otters coexisting peacefully. Maybe beavers just have to put up with their dangerous neighbors because they have no other choice. Either you've got a beaver right by your side or you risk finding yourself in the middle of the woods come fall with no shelter. It's not a pleasant outlook, as you can imagine, mainly because beaver lodges offer protection from predators. Without a safe spot to hide, beavers are at high risk. But the cold season's also dangerous. As temperatures drop, ponds freeze over, and beavers retreat to their lodges, relying on the supplies they manage to gather. Without their lodge, they not only lose shelter, but also the provisions they stored up for the winter. And of course, a lodge is a cozy refuge. Inside these lodges, the temperature can stay around 32 degrees Fahrenheit, even when it fluctuates from about 19 to minus 6 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Yes, beavers can handle the cold to some extent, but they can't survive long without their home. Perhaps the cold will kill a beaver faster than predators could get to it. It's not like predators are in any hurry. When beavers are out of the water, they become pretty clumsy and vulnerable, like big nuggets waddling along the shore. Any predator would be happy to eat them, and it's only their cozy lodges with dams that keep the beavers safe. You might be thinking, but beavers can construct dams pretty damn quickly. Why can't they just build themselves a new home fast? Well, they can technically do that. It's estimated that a beaver can build a small dam in about 24 hours. It'll take the beaver family about a week to build a structure that's 35 feet tall. That's pretty fast, considering we're talking about dams, not lodges. But remember, time is short in the fall, and you're clumsy nuggets, and there are predators around. Additionally, during spring, summer, and fall, basically all year round except for winter, beavers diligently build and maintain dams by felling trees, using them later as a food source. So even if homeless beavers manage to construct something, it's unlikely they'll gather enough food to last through the winter. These aren't just my guesses. In the guidelines for relocating beavers, it's advised not to move them to a new location at the end of the season. This is because they might not have enough time to build a home, gather food, and could end up starving or falling prey to predators. But if our nugget faces off against a wolf, it stands zero chance. Otters and beavers, on the other hand, are animals of roughly the same size. So much so that people often mistake them for each other. Well, at least those who haven't seen enough Polish bobber memes. However, there are still some differences. Firstly, beavers weigh up to 110 pounds, with the average ranging from 24 to 66 pounds, making them the second largest rodents alive today, after capybaras. A beaver's body length ranges from 31 to 47 inches, not including the tail, and their shoulder height is between 12 to 24 inches. Beavers also have teeth specifically designed for gnawing trees. Not only do these teeth constantly grow like those of other rodents, but evolution threw in a bonus for beavers by giving their enamel a high iron content. This iron gives beavers' teeth an orange color and makes them more resistant to wear and tear. What about otters? North American river otters typically weigh between 11 and 31 pounds, with big males sometimes hitting 33 pounds. Eurasian otters, found in Eurasia and occasionally in Africa, usually weigh around 15 to 26 pounds, with large males reaching up to 37 pounds. Overall, it seems like beavers are much larger, making otters appear small, skinny, and even fragile next to them. But then, why do otters often come out on top in battles with beavers and can even eat their opponents? Well, cases like these are pretty rare overall. There are tons of videos and photos showing instances where a beaver actually scares off an otter and the otter runs away in fear, so most of the time size does matter after all. And just a reminder, otters hunting beavers usually do it out of extreme hunger, when they have to take risks just to survive. I'm talking about attacks on adults, of course. Baby beavers don't cause otters any problems. However, otters, like many other species of mustelids, are capable of taking down prey much larger than themselves. For instance, they can take down a gray-lag goose, which measures up to 36 inches in length and can even fly. Actually, saying beavers are similar to otters is a stretch. Yeah, they might look somewhat alike, but fundamentally they're worlds apart. Beavers are sluggish, laid back, and not the most graceful. They're basically oversized rodents. They're in the same family as hamsters and capybaras. That's the extent of their threat level. Meanwhile, otters are speedy, agile, and slick animals related to martens, wolverines, and honey badgers. Otter family, to be honest, is quite the carnivorous bunch, almost like a mafia. So it's not surprising at all that when a hungry otter really wants to eat a beaver, it can easily do so. And the beaver won't stand a chance against such a predator. Back in 2005, in the town of Givas in eastern Turkey, some shepherds were having their usual day. They let their flock graze and settle down for breakfast when, out of nowhere, one of the sheep leaped off a cliff and died. And then another followed, and another, and another. Can you guess how many animals ended up jumping? A couple dozen? Nope. About 1,500. Yep. Around 1,500 sheep took the plunge one after another. It could have been much worse, though, because that day only 450 of them died. Those were the ones that jumped first. Their bodies acted like cushions for the rest. Let that sink in. We're talking about 450 sheep here. According to estimates, the losses from these deaths went over $100,000. A hefty sum for the region, especially around the mid-2000s. But why did the sheep go along with it in the first place? Shouldn't instincts have led them away from the cliff's edge as far as possible? Sheep are really social animals, always needing the company of other sheep in their herd. They're wired to follow each other no matter what. This instinct has let shepherds control sheep for centuries, but originally it helped them stay safe from predators. It's what keeps them together in bad weather and such. So Turkish sheep probably didn't realize they were going to die. Most likely, the landscape was such that none of the sheep understood why the ground beneath their hooves suddenly vanished. They were just following each other, unaware of what lay ahead. There was a similar story in Switzerland in 2017. 13 cows broke through their pen, broke up some fences, and then fell off a 164-foot cliff. Looking into what happened, people thought maybe a predator was after the cows, but this explanation doesn't work for the sheep. This all happened right under the noses of the shepherds. No other explanations make sense. It's important to make clear one thing here. Herd animals actually don't just blindly follow one leader because, well, who knows what that leader might be up to. Even in their herds, they're aware of the risks. But when a certain number of members in the group act in sync, others tend to follow suit. As for sheep, well, it seems like something went wrong there. Sure, people have long been aware of how herd behavior works, and it's not just shepherds who use it. Ever seen those old-style slaughterhouses in America? These tall structures with ramps? Animals were supposed to climb up to the 4th floor to get to the kill pits. We're not getting into the ethics of this, just the logistics. Cows and pigs had no trouble, but sheep would huddle together and resist. And then people came up with a brilliant idea: to train goats with bells around their necks. These goats confidently led sheep to the pits, for which they received rewards, and the sheep followed their lead, ignoring even the scent of blood. These goats, known as Judas goats, actually replaced a significant number of workers in production. Without them, sheep wouldn't be processed at all, and people wouldn't get any goods or profits. But all this pales in comparison to the animals we'll talk about next. They really got the short end of the stick when it comes to leaders because, anyway, you'll see for yourself soon. We'll start with orcas. Everybody knows orcas live in pods, which are close-knit family groups with intricate social setups. At the helm of such a family is always the matriarch, the eldest female who teaches other orcas how to live, choose where the pod will move, and so on. Female orcas usually outlive males, sometimes living up to 90 years in their natural habitat, and maybe even longer. I'm not kidding. They gather a lot of vital knowledge over their lifetime. But hey, everyone makes mistakes, and if anything goes wrong with the pod, it's usually because of a wrong call by the matriarch. This is what happens when orcas get trapped in ice. It's a common sight for people in Russia, Canada, Japan. Here's how it goes down. A family of orcas comes near the shore, probably for some hunting action, and then the wind changes, shuffling the ice to block their way. You might say, why not just die? Well, they can, but orcas still need to come up for some air. When ice closes in on all sides, they're stuck without a way out and could end up suffocating. Sometimes, when orcas are lucky, humans come to the rescue. That's what happened in 2013 when Canadians from Hudson Bay area stepped in to save 12 orcas from starving to death. Marine biologists say situations like this might occur because less experienced orca groups just make a wrong move. They swim in the wrong direction because, you guessed it, because the matriarch decided so, and nearly doomed the whole pod. Unlike herd and pack animals, polar bears prefer solitude. But that doesn't make them immune from mistakes, which are usually caused by the mother bears. Unfortunately, it's the bear cubs that suffer the consequences. In 1989, scientists documented an unusual incident where a polar bear's den collapsed due to abnormally warm winter temperatures, rain, or heavy snowfall. As a result, the den's roof simply caved in, killing both the mother bear and her newborn cubs. Sure, the main reason behind this was the sudden change in weather, something the mother bear couldn't control, but back then it was the first known incident of its kind. And since then, there haven't been any reports of similar den destructions, even though the planet hasn't gotten any colder. Researchers also suggested that the mother bear might have been too young and inexperienced, so the den she dug didn't meet safety standards. Actually, bear cubs often drowned while swimming because they simply can't keep up. Their mothers chose routes that are too hard and long for the cubs to handle. Sure, the mother bear probably doesn't have much choice, but still, spending so much time in the water with your cubs and not helping them out? Weird. Swans often live in groups, and when food becomes scarce in late autumn and winter, the whole group migrates to a new location. Typically, they head to open, grassy fields near a water source where they can feed on grass. But before they dig in, they need to find a new spot, which usually means one or two birds need to scout around. Once they discover a particularly good spot with plenty of food, water, and such, they settle in. And then other swans notice and join them. It's a simple strategy that doesn't require much effort. Yet, this habit of relying on a couple of their fellow birds without checking the place they settled in put the swan group in quite a tight spot. This story occurred in Slovakia and left the local farmers completely puzzled. At first, a pair of swans appeared there, drawn by large pools of water and lush green sprouts. Soon, more and more birds gathered in the fields, mistaking the poppies for rapeseed. They started feeding on the shoots, leading inevitably to intoxication. Surely you're aware that poppy flowers contain harmful levels of alkaloids, which are toxic to birds' digestive systems. Unable to fly and vulnerable to predators, dozens of swans died. And if that wasn't enough, a group of more than 150 birds also destroyed a significant portion of poppy fields, leaving farmers without their earnings. But just like in the UK, swans in Slovakia are also protected, which meant farmers couldn't just shoo them away from their fields. As a result, nature activists stepped in, relocating some of the birds to a rehab center. Sadly, most of the swans there didn't make it. all because of an inexperienced couple of swans who landed in the wrong place. All right, swans might not be the brightest bulbs in the box, but what about elephants? Those big fellas are pretty smart, as we've mentioned in our videos plenty of times. Yet, they also suffer because of bad leadership. Back in March 2020, a group of 14 Asian elephants decided to take a hike from their home turf in Pu'er, China. They covered quite a distance, with nobody getting where they were off to or why. In just 40 days, these elephants managed to trash 138 acres of farmland, racking up a damage bill of over $1.1 million. They weren't shy around people either, wrecking stuff, stomping on chicken coops, and even swiping 220 pounds of grain from a local distillery. And they just kept on walking. It's unclear why the group decided to venture out from the reserve, which was being monitored by a dozen drones, but the expert thinks it was because of inexperienced leadership. Bad leadership led the elephants on a long and pointless journey. The most likely explanation is that the elephant leader himself didn't realize he was mistaken and was confident he made the right choice and chose the right path. Moreover, they stumbled upon some good loot along the way. Locals complained that elephants were devouring entire fields of corn and pineapples from trucks. A car salesman mentioned that 6 incoming elephants drank 2 tons of water in his store. Others crushed chicks, stuck trunks through the windows of a nursing home. In short, they were having a blast. This journey marked the furthest migration ever recorded of wild elephants in China. Along the way, elephants caused 412 incidents where things got damaged, and at one point they even brought an entire city to a halt. How did it all end? The authorities stepped in. They set up an emergency committee to ensure the safe return of the elephants home. They built temporary roads specifically for the elephants, set up electric fences, and placed traps in various locations to keep the animals on track. A team of 360 people on 76 vehicles, along with 9 drones, monitored the elephants. After 17 months, the elephants finally made it back to their original sanctuary, traveling a distance of 810 miles. Can you imagine what the elephants said to their leader when they came back to where they started? It's a relief that none of them got hurt. 1,000 birds in Chicago weren't so lucky. They died because they flew in the wrong direction during migration. On October 9th, 2023, 964 birds crashed into the McCormick Place Lakeside Center, a mostly glass building located on the shore of Lake Michigan. Overnight, as many birds died as typically do in a year because, yes, birds occasionally collide with the building without noticing it. However, this time the number of casualties was unprecedented. Before, the record number of birds killed in a single day flying into a convention center was between 200 and 300, but nearly 1,000 is just too much. When scientists tried to figure out why this tragic event happened, they found that several factors came together in a really unlucky way. Overall, one should blame a risky combination of migration season, challenging weather conditions, and the absence of bird-friendly construction practices. On that night, many birds were flying because they'd been waiting for the right wind. Foggy conditions, reduced visibility, and low-hanging clouds caused the birds to fly lower, closer to buildings. Many of the birds that crashed were probably young and on their first migration. They simply didn't have the chance to figure out the right way to do things. To be fair, not all migrating birds have clear leaders that others blindly trust and follow. However, birds typically trail behind those flying ahead, so there's always someone setting the pace. Seems like the birds in Chicago ended up with some seriously poor leaders. It's not just the birds' fault here. People are mostly to blame. These glass panels we love putting on tall buildings confuse the animals, and they don't even realize there's an obstacle ahead. Besides, there's the issue of bright lights. Dimming the lights, especially during peak migration periods, could reduce the number of birds colliding with urban areas. Some cities even have specific laws regulating this. Odd as it may sound, pigeons, unlike all the other animals I've talked about today, have the ability to recognize and depose a not-so-bright leader. Yeah, super smart elephants might follow their leaders for days on end, but pigeons won't. Yes, we're talking about your regular rock pigeons here. They live in flocks, so there's one pigeon in charge who decides where the whole gang flies off to. To understand how things work, researchers broke a certain leader pigeon. By the way, pigeons navigate using an internal sun compass, tracking the sun's position throughout the day. So scientists tricked the leader pigeon into flying in the wrong direction and were surprised to find that the other members of the flock, whose compass was working fine, simply ditched their leader and flew where they needed to go. Seems like elephants and orcas could pick up a thing or two from that. Wow, we're wrapping up already? In 2019, a team of researchers used a remote-controlled vessel to explore the ocean floor. but stumbled upon something totally unexpected. What they found was incredibly rare and completely by chance: a whale that was falling. Throughout history, humans have only witnessed about 20 of these falling whales, but it's believed that without them falling to the ocean floor, it might have been devoid of living organisms altogether. However, in nature, everything is interconnected, and the whale was given a chance for a second life. So what happened during the exploration of Monterey Bay's seabed? Scientists lowered a vessel underwater to capture footage of an octopus garden and gather readings from various instruments. We mentioned these places in a video some time ago. So let's not dwell on the octopuses, because what the researchers stumbled upon was truly astonishing. Instead of a breeding ground for cephalopods, they witnessed a full-blown feast on the ocean floor around a dead whale. Or more like, what was left of the whale? When the researchers discovered the skeleton, only a portion of flesh and vascular tubes remained on it. Coming across a whale fall is like winning the lottery for scientists and researchers. They hardly ever happen. And the fact that they found one in conditions where they can actually study it makes it even more amazing. They found a whale about 10,000 feet below the surface, not too deep by ocean standards. After examining the remains, scientists figured the animal fell roughly 4 months ago. There was barely any flesh or vascular tissue left. You might be thinking, whales are massive, so finding where they die should be easy, right? Well, not really. Whales are indeed large, but they're still just a drop in the ocean compared to the vastness of the world ocean. Trying to guess where one will kick the bucket and then actually getting there to see it happen is a very challenging task, maybe even impossible. So yeah, scientists got really lucky, especially because they were quick to act. The whale's body was in such a state that it wasn't immediately obvious what species it was just by looking at it, and it's no wonder. All they had was a skeleton. If you didn't know what whale skeletons looked like, you might think they stumbled upon some prehistoric monster. Still, the researchers finished their study and reached some conclusions. It's believed to be a young gray or humpback whale, which are commonly hunted by orcas in this area. They suspect it was a young one because it measured around 13 to 16 feet long, whereas adults of these species can reach up to 45 to 55 feet. But even a whale of this relatively moderate size is enough to impress not just scientists, but also ocean creatures. In this underwater area, hundreds, maybe even thousands of animals have gathered, drawn by the fall of the whale. It's pretty much the whale's only chance to meet creatures living at depths it can't reach. But what exactly is meant by the term whale fall? In simple terms, it goes like this. When a whale dies in the sea, its carcass sinks to the ocean floor and begins to decompose. Just a natural biological cycle, you know? Whale falls are jackpots for deep-sea scavengers because one dead whale becomes a vital food source for a whole ecosystem. It's an important and long-lasting meal, which is essentially at great depths where finding food can be really tough. Sometimes, usually a few days after death, a whale can float on the surface of the ocean or close to it because of gas buildup. However, eventually the carcass, carried by ocean currents, sinks and often lands at great depths, providing deep-sea ecosystems with a concentrated food source. The thought probably never crossed the whale's mind, but it's finding a sort of second life as food for at least 100 different species. And that's just the ones we know of. You know, there are tons of creatures down in the ocean's depths that we haven't even discovered yet. Researchers have determined that up in the northern Pacific Ocean, when whales drop, it's like a buffet for around 12,490 creatures of 43 species. Sometimes over 30,000 organisms can be found on a single skeleton. And they're not in a hurry when it comes to eating. The carcass of a single whale can support an ecosystem for a whopping 100 years. 100 years! That's a whole century of comfortable living for the entire ecosystem. Feasting that follows the death of a whale unfolds in several stages, which isn't surprising given just how huge a whale can be. A blue whale, for example, can weigh up to 200 tons. Can you imagine how much food is in there? It might take quite a while for a whale to fully decompose, and this process happens even slower in colder waters of the deep sea and under higher pressure. In general, the deeper it is, the longer it takes for one whale to decompose. The process of a whale falling to the ocean floor is often broken down into stages, some lasting for months, while others can stretch over years. Scientists have no clue about the duration of certain stages at all. As I mentioned before, it's quite rare for scientists to observe such a process happening in real time. Generally, there are 4 stages, with the first one lasting from a couple of months to up to 5 years. So, a whale is falling to the ocean floor. At that time, scavengers like hagfish, macruidae, and sharks freely feast on the whale's soft tissues. Every bit of the whale, including its generous fat reserves, becomes fair game. Sharp teeth of underwater creatures easily tear flesh from whale bones. Among these scavengers, there may also be giant isopods that burrow into the body. They look like huge beetles you might find in your garden. They're joined by swarms of amphipod scavengers resembling sand fleas. It's quite a sight. Well, not for everyone. The process is natural, but hardly pleasant. It's interesting that without scavengers, whales can stay untouched in the water for years, even decades. This happens really deep down below because sharks simply don't go down there. And without them and other big scavengers, the process doesn't begin. Seems like they're needed to kickstart the first phase, where whale carcasses lose their integrity. Meanwhile, the falling of whales in shallow oceans could wrap up within a year or two. They'll just get eaten up too quickly. But let's get back to our hero. It's believed to be a gray or humpback whale. Gray whales typically stay at around 16 to 49 feet deep, and they occasionally dive down to around 98 to 115 feet. Humpback whales tend to favor deeper waters, swimming at around 260 feet below the surface, occasionally diving to depths of up to 2,000 feet. However, the carcass discovered by scientists was located about 10,000 feet deep, in a place where neither species would have ever ventured during their lifetimes, meaning they would have never encountered creatures living there. Though it's better to avoid some of them altogether. On the other hand, it's at such depths that you might see deep-sea octopuses feasting on those who feast on whales, crustaceans, worms, and mollusks. Next comes the second stage, which lasts from a couple of months to around 2 years. It takes about 2 years for the soft tissues of whale carcasses to fully decompose. Well, the ones that weren't eaten during the first stage. Here, a bunch of bristle worms, crustaceans, and other small organisms jump into the game, feasting on the remains left behind by larger predators. Alongside, all these little creatures make themselves at home on the bones and in rich deposits around where the whale fell. A decomposing whale body enriches the local environment with organic compounds, and small organisms make the most of it. Even after the soft tissues of a whale disappear, their organic components like cartilage can continue nourishing the surroundings for months or even years simply by breaking down. At the same time, a whale skeleton becomes a reliable home for invertebrates. From their perspective, a whale's fall is like stumbling upon a well-developed neighborhood with high-end yet affordable housing and a couple of great supermarkets nearby. How about the third stage? It's the longest known one and could go on for up to 50 years. Take a look at the whale on the seabed. It's the same one I showed you at the beginning of the video. But a year has passed, and the animal has changed a lot. It's fallen apart. Once soft tissues separate from bones, bacteria, worms like ossidax, mollusks, and other organisms break down fats and fatty tissues and bones, producing sulfides that can be consumed by other organisms. Bacteria break apart fats and bones, releasing hydrogen sulfide, which then becomes food for deep-sea mollusks such as mussels and snails. By the way, the name of the worm genus Ossidax means bone-eating in Latin. Quite a fitting name, isn't it? These worms produce acid that dissolves the hard outer layer, then they extend tiny tendrils into the center of the bone. It looks almost like a plant growing roots. These tendrils then eat proteins like collagen, found inside the bone. To Ossidax, these proteins are a means of survival. Oh, here's another funny thing. When the worms penetrate the bones, the crustaceans leave. Then the worms pop back up, which leads to the return of the crustaceans who eat Ossidax. It's like a back-and-forth battle on whale remains that really amuses scientists. Well, scientists are generally a pretty jolly bunch. But then comes the fourth phase of the whale's fall, and nobody can say how long it lasts. That's partly because we've only been studying whale falls for a few decades, so there's not a lot of data. But scientists think the sturdy mineral skeleton left behind after the nutrients are all absorbed continues to be used by underwater creatures. It's commonly believed that the final stage of a whale's decomposition happens when its bones turn into minerals, creating a solid surface or suspension and filter feeders. These are creatures that feed on tiny floating organisms or organic leftovers, sifting them out of the water. The process of bone colonization can go on for several decades, or until there's no more space left on the bones. Naturally, this isn't something easily noticeable to the naked eye, like the fact that the whale lost its soft tissues. That's why some scientists break down the falling process into 3 stages instead of 4. The last one takes too long. Even though there's not a lot of research on whale falls, most examples come from the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. But saying most might be a stretch. Whale falls are such a new area of study that all the cases where people have spotted them could easily fit on a map. Pens mark natural fall spots, stars or fossil sites, and boats are where researchers recreated whale falls. You know, all the things we talked about today got me thinking, is a whale's death kinda cool? Hold on, I don't mean I hate whales or anything like that, but the fall of a whale could be like an oasis in the middle of a dry desert, supporting life where it might not otherwise exist. You see, most living things start foraging with a little help from the sun. Algae and plants work their magic through photosynthesis, turning sunlight into their grub. Then animals eat these plants and algae to keep going. Some animals snack on others, you know, the whole food chain thing. It works on land and in water. But here's the kicker. Sunlight doesn't reach the deep ocean floor. It's pitch black down there, which means no photosynthesis. So the food chain gets cut off before it even starts. That's why almost all the food in the deep ocean mostly drifts down from above, gradually sinking thanks to the laws of physics. The number of plants and algae at the bottom isn't enough to support a diverse range of life down there. That's why they need big animals that can bring down a ton of food to those depths. The stuff the bottom typically eats is called marine snow. It's essentially a slow drift of mucus, fecal pellets, and body fragments sinking from above. It's really not much. However, over the course of several weeks of feasting on a dead whale, deep-sea animals consume as much food as they typically get over years or even decades from the usual marine snow. That doesn't sound too healthy, going hungry for so long only to feast on a ton of food later, but in reality, deep-sea creatures just live like that, constantly toggling between famine and feast. They've chosen life at the bottom and adapted to it, with the cold helping to slow down their metabolism. So after gorging on a whale carcass, these deep-sea creatures can go for about a year without eating and still feel great. I kinda envy them, honestly. Let's go back to that map with the places where the whales have fallen. What does it mean by researchers recreating whale falls? Do they actually kill the whales? Of course not. But you see, witnessing a whale's death in the ocean and watching what happens afterwards is practically impossible. It's much simpler to recreate scenarios of falls. Take, for example, back in 2004, when a dead blue whale washed up on the shores of Monterey, California. Scientists saw this as an opportunity. They waited for the tide to rise, lifting the carcass, then attached it to a ship and pulled it out to sea, where they attached a weight to it, and down it went. That's when people really began learning about whale falls in detail. Pretty much what I told you today. While studying whales by watching them sink may seem fascinating for science, it's often impractical due to various reasons. Transporting a whale carcass is tricky, not to mention finding one in the first place. That's why some scientists turn to substitutes, like alligators, to study deep-sea feeding processes. They actually take dead reptiles, haul them out to the open sea, tie them to weights, and then drop them. How about dropping dead cows to the ocean floor? It's the same idea here: animal carcass, ocean, weights. It's the only way to study the fall since whales are so rare. This video shows rescuers taking down an osprey's nest, a bird of prey species, from a utility pole to move it to a safer spot. Nests on poles can be troublesome for humans, cause major electrical problems, and pose dangers to both the bird and its offspring. For some reason, ospreys really like making their nests on utility poles. For example, in Osterville, Massachusetts, an osprey nest literally caught fire. Passerby called the firefighters. Luckily for the frantic parent birds flying around helplessly, by some miracle, their chicks survived by jumping out of the burning nest and landing safely. It could have ended much worse. The thing is, even when firefighters get there, it doesn't mean the birds will be saved. Putting out these fires is hard since the power lines are still live. You need to cut the electricity first, and that process takes time. Sadly, the chicks don't often have that time. For example, in Utah, firefighters couldn't save an osprey nest in time, the chicks died, and their mothers circled the fire helplessly until the end. It was a heart-wrenching scene. And yes, we're talking about osprey nests again. It's a common issue. Quite often, these birds build their nests on utility poles, causing trouble for everyone. By the way, here's an unobtrusive reminder to hit the like button. In one instance, over 3,500 homes and businesses lost power because a nest caught on fire. In another, a nesting male was electrocuted while building. Naturally, the bird died. And here's the thing, ospreys keep nesting in the same spots every year, so even a nest that burned down with chicks won't teach them a thing. The same birds will do the same thing next year. and the year after that. They're so bad at learning from their mistakes that people have to build special platforms for their nests on poles just to help out. It's kind of sweet of people to do that, though it's mostly about safety. Why ospreys and why power line poles? It's simple. These birds love nesting at the very tops of tall, bare trees, and well-placed poles make a great alternative. It's tough to find suitable trees, but poles are everywhere. Many of the trees they used to nest in were rotten or dead, so people cut them down. No one realized that ospreys would start nesting on power line poles instead. If you think what those birds did was unbelievably dumb, just wait, it gets even crazier. So what do we have here? A swan sitting on a glass roof? It's a pretty cute picture, really, except for the fact that the poor swan is hopelessly stuck. How did this happen? Well, nature didn't give swans enough smarts to deal with all the things humans have invented. That includes glass roofs, which reflect the sky. A flying swan thinks it's water in a lake below, lands, and that's it. By the way, it got stuck because swans struggled to take off from land, and there wasn't any room on the roof for a proper takeoff. Swans deal with these kinds of problems more often than you'd think. Like after it rains, they might mistake a wet road for a pond. You'd think, how does that even happen? Easy. Another swan landed directly on a wet road in Moycull in Ireland, mistaking it for a river. Experts say that when swans land like this, they often hit the asphalt hard because they're not built by nature to handle such landings. As a result of the impact, a swan can get seriously injured or simply experience intense stress and lose its sense of direction. Well, you can understand them. Think about getting ready to jump into a pool only to find out it's actually just a painted design on the ground. At best, the swan's adventure ends with some unpleasant memories, but at worst, such a landing leads to car accidents as seen in Poole, Dorset County. Landing on the highway during rush hour, the swan seemed a bit lost at first, then went on its way, ignoring the havoc it caused. Meanwhile, two cars trying to avoid hitting the bird crashed into each other, with one catching fire shortly after. Luckily, the passengers suffered only minor injuries and were able to get out. The swan, meanwhile, just flew off without a hint of remorse. On the highway, there was plenty of room for him, and it seemed like that swan was really keen on clearing the accident scene. Maybe before the cops showed up, because, well, look at how those birds take off from the water. Of course it's tough for them to do it from land. Scientists have found out that swans need at least 90 feet to take off and another 90 feet to reach a safe altitude and clear surrounding obstacles, like buildings. Now think about a glass ceiling. Nope, no chance there. It's a whole other story for birds that aren't meant for swimming. In 2014, the Wildlife Aid Foundation released 7 young tawny owls into the wild. The release took place on a 1,000-acre piece of land, seemingly a perfect spot for them to return to nature. All the owls flew out of their box perfectly, except one. It flew around a bit and then suddenly ended up in the lake, right in the water. In the 34-year history of Wildlife Aid, it was the first time a tawny owl release didn't go as planned. It's like this young owl turned out to be one of a kind, unique, but not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed. I mean, nearly dying seconds after gaining freedom? Now that takes talent. They had to fish the young owl out of the water, dry it off, and take it back to the center to warm up. Luckily, the second attempt at releasing the bird went smoothly. It's no exaggeration to say this owl almost bit the dust. Water is no friend to owls. They can paddle a bit if they absolutely have to, but in general, owls steer clear of water whenever they can. Unlike swans or ducks, they simply can't take off from it because they lack waterproof feathers. People weren't wrong to pull the young owl out of the water. It could have actually drowned because it's not good at swimming for long. Wet feathers would make it heavier, plus the stress and cold water, so diving into the lake wasn't such a great idea for the owl. It's just a silly way to die. Hold on, there's a bird that met an even sillier end. Right in the middle of filming a show about falconry, they released a bird into a field next to a busy highway, and it flew smack into the side of a semi-truck at full speed. The whole thing got caught on video. For a while, folks thought it was the falcon owner's fault for picking the wrong spot, but turns out it wasn't about the spot at all. Falcons had been released in that field before, and everything was fine. So what's the deal here? Well, who knows, really. By the way, falcons have incredibly sharp eyesight. They can process visual input really fast and spot prey at speeds comparable to a Formula One car. With all that in mind, crashing into the side of a truck seems ridiculous. Every now and then, animals pull off some pretty dumb moves without any human intervention, or our inventions. Check out this video from up north in Canada. A pack of 25 wolves on the hunt for bison. Eventually, one bison gets separated from the group, looks like it's going to be someone's meal, but the bison keeps on sprinting, even with the wolves closing in. There's still a slim chance it might make a getaway, but then another bison barrels into it, knocking it off its feet. That's it. The fate of the first bison is sealed. It won't be getting back up. We can assume that the second bison was just trying to help, maybe tried to fend off the predators, but things, well, let's just say they didn't go as planned. Actually, when bison run, they lower their heads so their field of view is not great at those moments. Most likely, the second bison simply didn't notice his mate behind the herd, gave a nudge, and only then realized his mistake. But it was already too late. Or he's just smart enough, saw a chance to save himself, and decided to take it. It's every bison for itself. Now picture this. You're chilling on a Florida beach when suddenly you spot an alligator swimming in the waters just near the shore. It's scary, like really scary. And by the way, it actually happened back in 2022. A 10-foot alligator crawled onto the beach, hung out there for a bit, and then swam away. But here's the thing. Alligators don't live in the ocean. They prefer freshwater habitats like rivers, lakes, and swamps. They can tolerate salty water for a few hours or even days, but it's rare since they prefer to stick to their comfortable freshwater homes. Alligators' lives depend on this. Since alligators have no salt glands, they experience the same pressure as humans when in salt water. Simply put, in salty water, we all lose moisture from our bodies and increase the amount of salt in our bloodstream. If this goes for too long, it can lead to stress and even death, including for freshwater alligators. Alligators can close their nostrils and throat to prevent salty water from getting inside, but they can't keep doing that for too long. Knowing all that, the alligator's decision to swim along the Florida coast seems kinda reckless. Let's just hope it knows what it's doing, finds its way back, and makes it to its freshwater home before the salt water becomes a threat to its life. Alligators are really lucky. They can switch between water with varying salt levels without getting critically harmed. Sharks, on the other hand, have it much worse. When marine predators like great white sharks move from salty to freshwater, their cells start expanding and bursting due to changes in salt concentration. This leads to bloating and eventually death. Except for bull sharks, they turned out smart enough to adapt to living in both salty and fresh water. But that's a whole different story. Take a look over here. Yep, just your typical parking lot by an IHOP restaurant in Southington. And there's a goose who figured this spot is prime for nesting eggs. Imagine the surprise of those who stumbled upon it. First, they noticed a male goose sitting still in the parking lot, thought it had been hit by a car. But then they found a nest with eggs, and inside it, a female goose fiercely guarding them, not letting anyone, including her own mate, near them. Of course, it's hard to explain to this bird that it picked the worst possible spot to nest. The female goose is constantly bothered by people, which makes her nervous and defensive, causing inconvenience for restaurant guests and herself. They fenced off the goose and her nest with bright ribbon, but there are always kids who can't be stopped by any barriers. There should be some explanation for why the mom-to-be chose such an odd nesting spot, especially since it seems like even her partner was against it. Typically, a goose couple picks a secluded spot for their nest. It might be near urban areas, but it's often tucked away in tall grass or bushes, making it hard to find. Still, the biggest risk to nests is predators such as dogs, raccoons, opossums, and skunks. These critters steer clear of bustling parking lots just like any regular animals would. So from that angle, the behavior of the goose even seems reasonable. I'm just not sure if the game is worth the candle. And how on earth does the goose plan to get to the nearest pond with her goslings? Call an Uber? Penguins face quite different problems. It's known that these birds can shoot arcing streams of poop that travel almost twice the length of their bodies. Scientists recently even calculated the force exerted by their tiny intestines for this and how far the poop can fly. This quirky yet intriguing study earned the authors an Ig Nobel Prize in 2005, and I think it was well-deserved. On one hand, who would even bother to investigate penguin poop chutes? But on the other hand, it's pretty darn cool. Scientists have even figured out why nature gave penguins such a weird superpower. It turns out that explosive poop jets help birds keep their nests tidy. They just poop far away. Do penguins suffer from this? Nope. But they probably aren't thrilled when someone else's stream lands in their own nest. By the way, if we scale up penguins' ability to human proportions, it'd be like having the skill to shoot up to 6 feet away. Just thought you should know. Back in 2018, there was a surprising discovery down in Antarctica. A whopping 1.5 million Adelie penguins were found thriving in a small area. Nobody had a clue that so many of these birds were hanging out there. For at least 2,800 years, the elusive penguins lived unnoticed on the Danger Islands, even though researchers believe they knew the whereabouts of all Adelie penguin colonies. But satellite images proved them wrong. In this tiny area, so small it's not even on most maps of Antarctica, there are more Adelie penguins than in the rest of Antarctica combined. And yes, they found the colony thanks to poop stains. Science can take some really odd routes sometimes. Let's get back to animals. They don't seem to realize just how much they're endangering themselves. Katie Morlock from Minnesota thought she'd do a good thing by putting out some pears in her garden. The pears had been sitting in the fridge for a while. After a bit, a squirrel grabbed one of the pears and scurried up a tree with it. But then things got weird. An hour later, the squirrel came back down acting all strange. It was struggling to stay on its feet, swaying around like it was drunk. That's when it hit Katie. Those pears in the fridge must have fermented. But the squirrel didn't seem bothered. It clearly came back for more, even though it could barely sit straight. Even though alcohol is at the very least harmful to the animal, and at worst makes the squirrel totally defenseless against predators, forget predators, it could fall and hurt itself. Alcohol is so harmful to squirrels that it can damage their internal organs. Giving them alcohol on purpose is considered animal cruelty and is illegal. In short, don't hand a squirrel a bottle of booze, or that bottle might end up in, you'll end up behind bars. If you watched all the way through, make sure to hit that like button. See you later.